Hey everyone, welcome back to a special conversation for the Legend Fiction Show. We're joined today by Brian J.L. Glass. Welcome, Brian. Good to have you with us.
Hi, it's great to be here. Thank you.
So this conversation's for the convention, LegendHaven, that we're hosting, Legend Fiction hosts, hopefully every year. Our goal is to build the biggest online Catholic and Orthodox convention for sci-fi and fantasy fiction. And as of now, we are the biggest because there are no others. So we're partnering up. So we're doing it.
Now.
We're proud to partner with Doxicon, and Brian is speaking for the second time now with Doxicon for the second year, and it's their 10-year anniversary this year. So we're really proud to partner with these incredible people. So Brian's got an amazing background. So he's Orthodox. You think you said the Antiochian Church?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. You're also a comic artist. You've worked for Marvel and DC, and you're, pardon me, comic writer?
Writer.
Excuse me, or artist. Okay, writer. So for Marvel and DC, you spent time with that, and then you've gone on to work on a lot of your own projects, and Mice Templar is one of the biggest ones that you're most well known for, I believe. So you sent over some really fascinating little interviews that you'd been involved in, and there was the one line in there that I thought that is perfect for this con, which is called Worlds Without End. And you said what matters to you is building universes that resonate, especially and this relates to Mice Templar. So first, I'd love to come back and ask you a little bit about your story for those in our community who have never met you, and maybe some of the key lessons that you took away from your time working with Marvel and DC, and because now you've gone into this space where you're writing your own stories and you're working with your own artists to create works that are meaningful to you. So let's start there.
Actually, I got my opportunity to work for Marvel due to winning Harvey Awards for the Mice Templar. So I had my start in the realm of creator-owned. My partners on Mice Templar were Michael A. von Oming and Victor Santos, two extraordinary artists and storytellers in their own right. But when Mike first brought me aboard Mice Templar, that's where he was the one that initially said the reason he wanted me to be his partner on the series, he just had a concept, but he knew he wanted an epic story to go with it. And he was the one who initially said, I'm asking you, meaning me, to build him a world and make it resonate. And we had done gaming together, and that was that was the hook for him. He knew I could tackle things like that. So it was ultimately the work that I did on Mice Templar that got me nominated and then a winner of a pair of Harvey Awards. And then it was shortly after that Marvel contacted me, because once you kind of make a name for yourself in what's called the independents. And so Mice Templar was from Image Comics, the same company that gave us the Walking Dead comic by Robert Kirkman and his artist partners. And so I got to go to Marvel. They gave me, because Mice Templar was mythology heavy and fantasy, they gave me characters like Valkyrie first, and then I got to do a couple of Thor miniseries. And eventually, it was fun because it coincided with the start of the MCU Thor films.
Okay.
And so I got to do a bunch of projects there. And eventually, I was more interested in, you can achieve notoriety working for Marvel, but I've known people who the totality of their career are the runs that they did on various Marvel or DC established character books. Mm. And when those runs end, or when their careers finally come to an end, they're known for having contributed to, in essence, someone else's creation, what is now a very corporate entity. Mm-hmm. And so the freedom to truly explore fantastic, innovative ideas, it used to just have to go through your editor. And if the editor was willing to take a chance on you, you got a lot more experimentation. Well, now those editors they're part of editorial boards, and then those boards are answerable to the corporate side.
Mm-hmm.
The moment the moment Marvel got bought by Disney,
Mm-hmm.
within 6 months, the changes came trickling down into just simply how the artistic process or the creative process would work.
Yeah.
And I'm not opposed to that. The people who can thrive in that environment, incredibly talented people. I still have a lot of friends working at Marvel and DC. I started to find I want to be known for what I have created. And if the things that I create can build on and create legacies of their own, that's the challenge for me.
Agreed. Yeah. As we were joking before I hit record, I'm just curious, what is this fascination with mice? Because I have a epic sort of fantasy novel that I've been procrastinating on for over 10, 15 years. It was actually one of my first ideas, and I figured mice is just going to be it. And then I grew up loving Redwall, and then I discovered Mouse Guard, and there's another one out there that I forget. And then to discover what you're doing with Mice Templar, like mice are amazing. Why did you pick mice as a theme? What is it that it did for you in terms of being able to explore themes and still have a bit of fun and fantasy with it? And what is it that like some people choose aliens or elves, and so you picked mice. What did that do for you?
Oh, well, in a way, I have to say the mice picked me through my partner, Mike Oeming.
Oh, gotcha.
This is one of the magic collaborator stories where something is truly the vision of multiple people, but I do truly feel I got to put my particular stamp on the Mice Templar.
Mm-hmm.
Mice Templar began from Mike Oeming, and there's a story which may be apocryphal or not. He can't be sure. But as a child, he was obsessed with, because it reran on cable endlessly back in the day, the Don Bluth animated Secret of Nim.
I loved that book growing up. Yeah.
Yep. Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of Nim.
Well, and the cartoon. Yeah.
And so Mike Oeming was an artist from the beginning. And the story that he's not sure whether or not it's true, he does know because he still has all the art. He was just endlessly fascinated by the rats. So one of the earliest things he learned to draw as a child in single digits were the rats, Don Bluth's rats from Secret of Nim. And that one day on some, I don't know if the History Channel was around at that point yet, but on a history show, on came this thing about the Knights Templar. And the potentially apocryphal story is that an adult came over and asked him what he was drawing, because he was still fixating on the rats, the Nim rats. Mm-hmm. And when the adult asked him, he said he was drawing Mice Templar, like on the TV. And then they clarified, they explained, no, it's not Mice Templar, it's the Knights Templar. And he is reported to have rebutted, like here he was like 8 or 9 years old, but the rebuttal was, it would have been better if they were mice.
Totally.
And so as a result, that stuck with him for like a decade or decades, until he was finally ready to kind of tackle his own. He did a short little strip in the 1990s. And then he thought he was out of comics completely, till he did this book with Brian Bendis in 2000 called Powers. And that completely revitalized his career. He decided he wanted to return and do Mice Templar as a real book this time. And he dug out all his old notes and he read through them. And these were his original words that, like, I was so obsessed with Joseph Campbell. It's literally the hero's journey. The version of it is the hero's journey beat for beat to the point where the moment you would have read issue 1, you go, all right, I know exactly like where this is going, how it's going to end.
Yeah.
And much to his credit, he said he believed, he recognized at the time he was not ready yet as a storyteller to embark upon that size of an epic.
Mm-hmm.
So he asked me to go out to dinner one night. We go to dinner. He tells me about Templar and then says, but I don't think I can do it. I'd like you build me a world, make it resonate, because that's what you do.
Oh, to be a fly on that wall.
It was
So how did you do that? You stepped into somebody else's dream world and then you expanded on it, honoring the parameters. What then was your process for enriching and expanding this world?
Well, he again, to Mike Oeming's credit, he handed me a 6-issue miniseries synopsis and said he wasn't fixated on any part of it. He just said, use this as your starting point. Use or discard at your discretion. Mm-hmm. And so I think in the end, I maybe used about 3 issues, and it's not issues 1, 2, and 3 of the series, but I used about 3 issues of his original creative content to spin it into the 50-something 7-volume collections that we ultimately produced to tell the one big epic story. And I also found moments where I wanted to honor him, like honor that it originally began with him. So he would have, like, there was he had this one little throwaway line where the young hero mouse at the beginning, along with a character that you think is going to be his mentor, they're skirting through the wilderness, and they skirt around Kildray Hill because his mentor says, we want to avoid Black Anais, the druid witch of Kildray Hill. And she's never referenced again. She never shows up. And I just asked him, so what's the story with this character? And he said, oh, I don't know. It's just, it was a world building name drop. Well, for those who have read Mice Templar, she becomes one of probably the 2nd or 3rd level villain in the saga down. She becomes the character that is the conduit between the evil side of tangible villainy and spiritual villainy. Black Anais is that bridge. She gets to provide at the end the last temptation of our hero. And so there was lots of little things like that. Mike Oeming would just name something. I'd ask him about it. He'd say it would be throwaway. And that just opened the door for me to run with it. He randomly did this sketch one day. It was actually a watercolor painting. He did it in black and white tones of his hero mouse riding like on the back of a skeletal cat, riding a zombie cat. And he sent it. It showed up in my email one day, and he just like, oh, so I just did this last night, and it's just the whim took him. And I went, oh my goodness, what is this for? And he went, oh, inspiration came last night. And now again, if you've read Mice Templar, Zombie Cat is a crucial part of the story, because again, I simply took some visual inspiration Mike provided, and my reaction was, I can work with that. And I just fed it right into the narrative. And I guess the other way in which it built was because his intention at the beginning was how the young hero was, and a part of his hero's journey was he was going to restore the order of the fallen Mice Templar. He would restore them. And I thought, well, no restoration really has any weight unless we know why did the Templar in this story fall. And I guess here I should interject. the Mice Templar is not a retelling of the Knights Templar, but
Right.
with mice.
Right.
It just all it shares in common as mice and knights. They almost rhyme.
Yeah. How
So,
obviously with the Knights Templar, their name comes from Temple in Jerusalem, Solomon's Temple. What's the meaning for the use of Templar within this universe?
that I never explored. So I'm
There you
admitting
go.
my own failure there. Just simply.
So I'm curious then to know more about. So you took on and got involved in this project, and you've honored the source, and I really want to now understand more about you, and then what you brought to the to the creativity of the whole thing, as you're saying, to make it real. What are some things that you then did that made it feel real to you, and obviously to him, and then to all of the readers who've loved it? But what are things that you look for or that you work towards to bring it that sense of realism or something that lands?
Well, the first was where I was going. I finally just asked him the question because it was contained in none of his notes. I just said, in your view, how did the Templar fall? And he just said, well, it's I don't know. It's a setting. It's like Stephen King's Dark Tower. It's set in a world that has moved on. It's a great line that just it conjures up so much imagination. But for Mike, it was, well, it's a world where the Templar have fallen and the hero will restore them. But my dilemma was, because I wanted to bring the realism and I wanted there to be substance to the fantasy, just restoring this legendary order is insufficient unless we know what was at stake. What was at stake with their fall? Right. And the moment Mike's answer just opened the door for like, okay, I can now do anything. So in addition to furthering the story in advance, at the same time, I was building the past as to why they fell, how they fell. They have this
retconning is like, it's the funnest thing ever.
Yeah. And each element proceeded to like almost like a teeter-totter. They both kept building exponentially. I would come up with a new facet for the ancient past, and it would immediately inspire the direction of where the future was going. And we were also talking in the pre-interview about creativity and spirituality.
Right.
I guess this would be a great place for me to jump in. I dislike when, like, it's fine for a sermon, a homily analogy. Let me tell a parable where the intent is to convey a spiritual message. But I feel a lot of the works that Narnia is an exception, but I feel that if you begin with the premise of, I want to establish this spiritual idea and let me convey it through a fantasy or a science fiction allegory of some capacity, I knee-jerk at that, and I feel that a lot of that becomes propaganda. It
feels manipulative in a way, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like it's spiritual propaganda. You're reading, like you're not embarking on an adventure so much as you're following that creator has a message to impart.
Right.
And they have wrapped their spiritual message, their ideological message, their socio-political message is now all wrapped up in these trappings that almost fool you into, well, I wanted to follow the exciting adventures of these characters, but they're just conduits to serve up a message that at the end of the day, I either agree with or I disagree with. And if it's a message you don't agree with, the book can literally, like, the more that you loved it, the more it can alienate you in the end.
Right.
So that's just all preface to say. So I never like to begin there. I love using the analogy of Tolkien, in which you never get to all of the big epic moments of Return of the King. You don't get the muster of Rohan, the siege of Gondor. the march on the Black Gate, the climbing of Mount Doom, not even the scouring of the Shire. You get none of that unless your story begins with this little middle-aged hobbit who just wants to be left alone, sitting on his porch with smoking his pipe weed, and the wizard comes by and harasses him, and then, "Good day, sir."
Yeah.
And without that moment, and then the wizard putting the sigil on the door,
Yeah.
without that moment, you get none of the epic that's 1,500 pages later.
Hearing you speak, for the first time, I've never thought of interpreting some of that adventure from a psychological perspective, or from a sort of the mystic or mythical perspective of how a person engages with reality. And that's actually very intriguing. But okay, so like we talked about, I think we're on the same page. And in terms of all of this sort of thing, like this story needing to be, I mean, a story is a story. It's not a tract for evangelism or proselytism. Story has to lead with a story. And like with Tolkien, I think he's famous for saying, the whole thing just emerged as a tale I wanted to tell, and then it became more intentionally Catholic, for example, in the revisions. And I think that's an important place for a story to begin, as a feeling through or a working through of an adventure that captivates you, and then perhaps to come back and consider if the story needs any more of that additional clarity, you know. And I think I'll make the caveat that there are some stories out there where it might make sense to be more overt. In that case, it may be either for children or for, I don't know, it's like a parable or something like that. But that's a specific sort of use case. And as far as our brand is concerned, legend fiction and the kind of work that you're doing, we are talking about stories that are meant to stand on their own feet, as stories that captivate you, that pull you out of daily life to enter into something that you can't put down, something that's captivating, something that feels real and feels moving, even if you're dealing with mice in a delightful fantasy situation. So well, I want to come back to this whole faith-inspired thing, but I want to ask you first about comic book writing. What is it that you love about comic book writing in particular? Because you've also got a novel that you're working on, or a sci-fi series that's coming out at some unnamed, unmentionable point in the future. But what is it about comic book writing that you have loved?
Well, I originally went to school to be a filmmaker. And so one of the things that I do love about comic writing is because there's a visual component, like a prose writer, again, using Tolkien as an example, you can get entire pages just describing the countryside. And they're beautifully written, they're lyrical, they truly create a sense of place and of time and of mood. Mm-hmm. But in comics, a lot of the writing that you do in a comic script is you're providing directions for the artist. Mm-hmm. And then the artist will interpret your directions to create that picture that tells 1,000 words. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the process in comic script writing is very similar to screenplay writing, mm-hmm. in which a huge majority of what you're writing, all the viewer ultimately experiences mm-hmm. of your writing is the dialogue. But it's through that dialogue that the twists in the plot, that the beats shift, that the story progresses, that characters make their choices mm-hmm. to progress everything along. And so because as originally an aspiring filmmaker, I liked to think both that my storytelling was both the dialogue, the words, and it's the visuals. Mm-hmm. It's I'm not going to describe what's happening here. The audience is going to see the epic gun battle or the amazing climactic sword fight for all the fish. I don't know where that came from. But so it's a very different writing style, because you're writing very technically. You're not writing for the enjoyment of the audience. You're writing for either the director to interpret, you're writing for the cinematographer to interpret, you're writing for the comic artist to interpret.
Right.
And there's times where, like, one of the most frequent questions I get asked by people who really know nothing about comics is the infamous, right, so what do you actually do? What comes first? Do you do the words, or does an artist do a picture and you put words in people's mouths without realizing that if there's a page in a comic or a multi-page sequence that is so brilliantly illustrated in progressive storytelling that that you don't need dialogue. You don't need captions. You don't need anyone to verbally say anything. It plays out like visual storyboards.
Yeah.
And, well, then the writer must not have gotten paid for that. No, the writer still scripted all of the story that is unfolding. The writer is not just filling the balloons.
Right. I think for me, what's been, I'm not a screenwriter. I think I tried writing a play once when I was 16, and it wasn't very good. But what I loved about reading screenplays, or especially comics, like I grew up, we read so many comics as a kid that there came a point where my dad was like, okay, moratorium here on every and all comics. You guys need to cut it out and actually read something a little healthier or whatever. Stop drawing superheroes. Debatable whether it was a good idea or not, because we just went underground. But anyhow, that watching that discipline of how comics are written and crafted, and for me more recently, I've gotten back into trying to write a novel, and I tried to take what I'm observing and seeing that discipline, and nothing can be communicated unless the author perceives it, and nothing happens unless characters talk about it, in the same way that would happen in a movie. And it's been fascinating because you end up avoiding a massive trope that people dislike when it comes to fantasy or maybe sci-fi writing, which is info dumping and too much world building given before it actually matters, and so on. And that's something that's just fascinated me, because it forces the character and their perception of a situation to drive what is communicated and how it's interpreted. And as much as, like you said, you're building building the world for Mice Templar as you're building into the future, all of that stuff, though, still has to be communicated in a few short, very, simple lines, or in an image, or dripped out through a conversation. Now that you've moved on then to writing novels, what are some things that lessons that you have carried into writing for your own novels?
I guess the biggest thing is that grappling with the info dump, because when you're writing in the contemporary, the real world, or even a very established genre like Western or a medieval setting, these are all things that your audience, they're either intrinsically familiar with because they live it, or they've grown up with these environments permeating the entertainment that they've enjoyed.
Right.
And so when you're doing the cop on the street crime drama, you don't have to explain New York City, or you don't have to explain the concept of organized crime to anybody. You don't have to explain the concept of a robber, a murderer, so forth. But the moment you're in the realm of most fantasy or sci-fi, everything is utterly unique and new. So the moment you're introducing anything, the simple act of describing the new thing is you're traipsing into you're introducing something new to the reader, where the temptation is, well, the reader isn't going to understand unless I describe this.
Yeah.
And that's always your doom. Uh,
Now, I'm just curious to push back there. There, at the same time, there's also a body of work, and we've seen tons of either comics or movies and so on, where we have become familiar with themes like warp drive and hyperdrive and teleportation. So how have you gone about that? Where are you actually intentionally trying to create new things at every point that people have not experienced, or are you putting new twists on things we're familiar with, and that's where you're needing to spend that time? Or because there are authors that I've seen where they're describing things, I'm like, I know how a spaceship works. It's been 100 years, buddy. How are you going about that?
Well, in sci-fi, there are predominantly two schools. There's the space opera, and I'm even going to put under space opera Star Trek. There's Star Wars, Star Trek, because even though Star Trek likes to claim we're basing things on science, no, it's still, we jump in the ship and we zip on to the adventure.
Right.
And then there's hardcore sci-fi. It's like Arthur C. Clarke's work. I like to give another example. I'm a fan of both Arthur C. Clarke and of Isaac Asimov, and they are both known as very hardcore science writers.
Right.
But Isaac Asimov was writing space opera. But you knew that if his space opera invoked science, it was going to invoke science as was understood and accepted at the time he wrote it. And you could pull out your little slide rule and do the measurements yourself, and he was going to be accurate. But he never let the science get in the way of telling really exciting adventure stories that were mind-blowing.
Yeah.
Arthur C. Clarke, his idea of conflict, and I say this affectionately, is two scientists getting into an argument about the science of the discovery or the phenomenon they just experienced. And so in my writing, I prefer to go the Asimov route, and I'm not a science guy at all. So I definitely don't want to explain how spaceship engines work. I do feel the Expanse series that was then adapted for sci-fi and then later picked up by Amazon, they are a brilliant meld of kind of the space opera with the hardcore science of like, the spaceships on that series are really functioning the way real life spaceships work. And I don't know the science well enough to even attempt to I'd be exposed right away. I want my spaceship to be the means by which my heroes get from point A to point B, and to not let the science talk get in the way of the adventure unfolding. But my upcoming sci-fi series, it's called Dark Spaces. It does operate in a version of the universe that I believe is unique. I've never seen anyone else. It's not a vast expanse galactic type setting of a story. You don't have people using warp speed or hyperdrive to to jump from worlds that are like light years away from each other. It exists in a very, very different universe that I don't want to explain here until the
that's fine. I'm curious in talking about sci-fi, it's a conversation I've had a couple of different times with different friends on this channel, and I've got a loose working definition, so push back on it. It's that sci-fi is it's a category of fiction that's emerged especially in the last century or so, because it's at its heart, it's about a materialistic, non-spiritual, say, protagonist or culture coming in contact with a greater truth or a greater reality or an unaccounted for part of the pattern or something. But primarily it's materialism coming into contact with perhaps spirituality or something that exceeds the materialist sense. And I get a lot of Arthur C. Clarke is kind of playing with that. I grew up with who wrote War of the Worlds? H.G. Wells and John Wyndham and Arthur C. Clarke. They were my guys growing up, and then Michael Crichton. I love his style, like Jurassic Park. That I can't remember how many times I read that novel. But then I'm a Stargate guy. That was my generation was watching Stargate, and of course now there's Star Wars on Disney and all this stuff. And what I keep seeing with all of these is this sense of this is how we identify, and then you get movies like Arrival, right? Which I keep finding sci-fi movies that really dig into this particular thing. Like Philip K. Dick will do this a lot, I think, drawing on various sort of philosophies, and as Star Trek does. And it's this frontier of contact with things that we did not account for, that don't fit. And I think that's where sci-fi really thrives. Otherwise, you then become fantasy, or it just becomes straight up fantasy. I'm curious what you think and how you've thought about that with your novel.
I do think in terms that a lot of science fiction does deal with, you have to propel your characters into dealing with the unknown. And the moment dealing with the unknown is the thing that upsets your status quo. Mm-hmm. And in many ways, that is an analogy to spiritual confrontation, mm-hmm. whether it's the horror spiritual of, say, something like The Exorcist, or the classic haunted house. We're dealing with an entity from the spiritual realm. It's a borderline science fiction idea. Mm-hmm. This is something that does exist, mm-hmm. but it's totally outside our familiarity, our comfort zone, and then we confront it, and we have to learn what are the rules, in order to destroy the monster in the end,
right,
the evil. We are learning how does it work, so we can learn how it counters. Mm-hmm. And the very definition of faith is the belief in things unseen, undetermined. So a lot of the spiritual walk, the spiritual journey, mm-hmm. is the confrontation in both the good and the evil of the spiritual realm. Mm-hmm. The spiritual realm is not the tangible, here we are, using technology. No, the spiritual realm is suddenly something that, for those of us who believe, is equally real, mm-hmm. but you also have the adamant people who will only pure science, purely what can be quantified, what can be experienced and quantified. So I love the idea of the encounter with the unknown. Mm-hmm. I am a big horror guy. I grew up reading Stephen King novels. Mm-hmm. I'm a big fan of his...
I loved his. There's Prime. I think they made Under the Dome a couple of years back. I loved that, especially the first 2 seasons. I loved how it was a microcosm kind of parable reflection or contemplation of just what it means to be a human being. Mm-hmm. But your point there about coming into contact with things that we have not prepared for, and that that does sound like that's the heart of what science fiction is. And actually, Jordan Peterson has a description of the, how do you call this? Those who follow the scientific method, and modern scientists and so on, even those who declare themselves completely agnostic or non-faith related and so on. Peterson is adamant, no, they're operating within a space of very deep and intense faith, because at every point they say, whether they actually do it is something else, but the creed that they profess is that I'm on a journey of discovery, and the truth is out there. And at every point, when I come in contact with that, it must judge me and my hypothesis, and I must correct myself according to it so that I can continue to integrate it. I mean, that sounds like a Christian creed right there. I mean, it ultimately is. There's that constant sense of humility and transformation in the face of truth. And I think that's why I love science fiction, because it almost always comes back to that in some space or another, whether it's space opera or it's Anyhow, I love this discussion. In wrapping up, because we've gone for almost an hour here.
Wow.
I've got more questions, but what would you like to leave with people or encourage people who want to write science fiction, especially from a space of, how do I say, wanting to avoid doing something ideological, which we're seeing take over a lot of popular culture, but then also in spaces of faith, there's also the danger of crafting ideologically motivated storytelling, coming to the back home to the point and the function of what a story is meant to do. Any words you'd want to leave with people to encourage them in this idea of faith-inspired storytelling?
I guess first and foremost, a quick definition. Story is change. If your story ends on the same note that it began without something being impacted, either the world or the character, if something does not change from beginning to end, you just spent your entire tale treading water. So I love, we didn't get to go into this, but this is going to be the basis of some of my the speech that I'm going to give at Doxicon, is I love broken characters. I much prefer a character who is dealing with their baggage at the beginning, and the tale helps them in some capacity deal with the baggage. That's ultimately what a redemption story is. Mm-hmm. And so you don't really have much of a redemption if there was nothing to redeem in the first place. So I love introducing broken characters. And the moment you're telling a redemption story in any capacity, you're riding side by side along with Christian faith tradition, which is the ultimate salvation story, redemption tale. Mm-hmm. So, and again, I guess to emphasize a bit more, or to address what you specifically asked, to go into your tale intending conclusion X, to get my point across, my philosophy, my agenda, I feel very rarely does that work effectively. That I feel what you need more of is tell the tale, tell the story of the broken characters, taking that journey. And as you tell stories that are true to the character that you created, like if all of a sudden your characters just abruptly choose to do the right thing when you haven't appropriately set up, well, why would they choose in this moment to do the right thing? Or I'm going to be speaking a bit about Babylon 5 at Doxicon, and there's the character Londo Mollari, who consistently, whenever given the choice between doing the right or the wrong thing, he knows the difference. But every time he thinks doing the wrong thing, this time, this'll be the one that it makes up for all the past bad choices. Mm-hmm. And he spends 5 seasons making bad choice after bad choice after bad choice. That's why he's an incredible character.
Nice.
And when the right choices do come, they've been earned. Mm-hmm. And you realize he's finally acceding to the wisdom learned. So these are all the ingredients of being true to your character. Mm-hmm. Be true to the story unfolding, so that when you get to the end, you've told a tale that then you can look back through and say, hey, there's spiritual themes here. In retrospect, how can I go in and see them, bolster them, refine them so that they're helping and they're not derailing the well-told tale. So the goal should be the good tale well told. And if it has a spiritual message to convey, all the better. But I'm a big believer in cart before the horse when it comes to that.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's one of our conversations from before the con was with a nun, Sister Alison Glyett, and she made this wonderful turn of phrase, which is fantastic. She says, write what would have happened, not what should have happened.
Mm.
And I think that thinking right there helps you be a little more honest, a little more real with your characters. So, Brian, this was fantastic. I loved the opportunity to chat with you and to meet with you, and I hope others also did. Where can people find you online if they'd like to continue to follow you and perhaps score a couple of copies of your books?
Well, my main website that has links to all of my social media and my online store is brianjlglass.com. And that's Brian with a Y, and just include the JL. They're my middle initials, and glass, and you just spell it all out as one word, brianjlglass.com. And from there, there's links to some of my work on Amazon. There's links to my home store where you can get signed copies of the Mice Templar mailed to you. Links to my Facebook, my Twitter, I guess now it's X,
Yeah.
my Instagram. I am not on darn, what's the new one all the kids are
Oh, TikTok.
I'm not
We
on,
aren't either yet. So.
yeah, I have no plans to be on TikTok, so
Very good. So brianjlglass.com. So friends, you can check the link in the description. And then also Brian will be speaking at Doxicon for their 10-year anniversary celebration, which is happening this year. So check for that link also in the description, and go ahead and support Doxicon. If you're able to join them, please do so. I think they're going to make the replays available on their website afterwards. And hey, if you're a Catholic or Orthodox fantasy or sci-fi or anything, fiction writer, consider joining us at legendfiction.com. And it's a creative community that we're putting together to give people a place to give and get feedback, share their works in progress, and maybe triple their writing output, because we're all having so much fun together. So, Brian, this was amazing. Thank you so much. God bless everybody.
God bless.
Keep writing.